Alex, we're good?
We're good.
Thanks, Alex. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the Skokie Planning Commission for June 1st, year 2023. First order of business is to take attendance. Commissioner Mosley, present, is present. Commissioner Manchella is absent. Commissioner Scott Berman.
Present.
Present. Commissioner Franklin is absent. Commissioner Gupta. Again. Present. Commissioner Giovanna is not present. She's at home tending to a newborn daughter. Congratulations to her and her family. Commissioner Jeff Berman, he is absent. Commissioner McKay.
Present.
I am here, so we do have a quorum, we have 5 members. Okay, first order of business is to ratify the minutes from last meeting. We have a motion to.
So moved.
Commissioner Berman, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes have been approved. Okay, tonight we have 2 cases. 2 cases. Oh, thank you, sir. There are cases number 2023-10 P, which is a parking determination at 4400 Oakland Avenue. 2023-11 P, a special use permit, also at 4400 Oakland. And 2023-12 P, zoning chapter amendment for electric vehicle charging stations. Okay, the first 2 cases are related. Is a petitioner here tonight? Please come up. I must state that the Planning Commission is a advisory board to the Board of Trustees. Our vote tonight is not a final vote for these cases. They will hear the cases after we send out them our reports. They meet on the first and third Mondays of the month. And they will listen to case 2023-11 P. The Planning Commission will be the final governing body for case 2023-10 P, which is the parking determination. Okay. That's sir. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Mudassir Hussaini.
And your relationship with petitioner.
So we are a group of partners that are representing our project and vision here tonight before you.
Okay. Do you have people in your group that have potential to give testimony tonight?
Potentially, yes.
Would you have them please stand up? I will swear them all in.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, sir, you affirm that the testimony you give tonight is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, the whole.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Counselor, is there a notice in order? Yes, notice is proper and correct. Okay, very good. Okay, sir, please give us an overview of what you're accomplishing.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner members, and to my entire planning department fellows, we thank you for your time tonight and the opportunity to present our vision and our project before you today. And our journey begins about 2 years ago during the pandemic, when we all found an economic turn for the worse. And we shifted to a work from home model, and our current building and property at 4400 Oakton is a multi-use building. We have a tenant in there, Fifth Third Bank, which occupies the first floor. There is also a basement and there's also a second floor. Both the basement and the second floor were being utilized as office space. And once the pandemic hit, we no longer had tenants using the office space. Fast forward to today, that space has been vacant. We were not able to get any office space use or any tenants to occupy that space for any reason. And so what we did was, rather than have the space vacant, we worked with not only the city with Brian Augustine, but also hired the help of a marketing team to really understand the vision of Skokie, the economic development that's happening along Oakton Street. And so we wanted to research how we can help not only align ourselves with the village's endeavors, but also what the community in the area is lacking that we can bring to the community. And so one of the things we found was in our area a lack of space that allows for people to come together, right? And it was an opportune moment because the pandemic was now closing down. People were trying to get out, people were trying to meet, people were looking for a reconnection space. And so we thought, what a great idea to convert our second floor, which was vacant, into a semi-informal function hall or an event space where people can get together, have birthday parties, they can get together to have little small get-togethers or social events, right? And so we set out with this vision, and we worked again with Brian and Paul to put that together. We worked with a design team and an architecture team to see what would be necessary and entailed to get that vision done. And so here we are today with you and our team to share our plan to see not only how we can bring some community impact, but also relieve our hardship of finding a use for that space.
Okay. Currently, what's there now?
It's empty.
It's empty.
Correct. It's been empty for a few years now.
Any questions of the commissioner from the staff? Commissioner?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This was one of the bank buildings that around that corner, around that intersection. The bank still occupies 2 of the 3 buildings, is that right?
So this property 4400 only has 1 building on that property. And it is a 2-story building, and Fifth Third Bank occupies the first floor only.
Oh, and it continues to occupy the first
That is
floor,
correct.
and it will continue to.
That is correct.
So that's at the northwest corner of the intersection.
Right across the streets, the drive.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Are they going to utilize a drive-through at the west end of the parking lot? Or is it still in there?
The drive up ATM.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Will that still be there?
So right now, 4401, which is across from Oakton, has 2 drive-through ATMs. That is what they currently use. There was ATMs at the edge of the parking lot, which is no longer being used.
One question, the building department, did they provide a determination with regard to occupancy?
That's correct.
Those numbers?
Yeah, so we were given 200. We also utilize that space in our business plan to accommodate no more than 200. In our business strategy and the types of events that we are anticipating, we anticipate anywhere from 100 to 150 occupants for an average event.
Okay, so typically the special use building occupancy varies widely based on the use. So for example, if the room is filled with tables and chairs, that reduces the occupancy dramatically. So those conversations have been had and taken into account, and that reduced occupancy instead of banquet styles still
Yes.
works and fits, and it's
Yes.
that's all those conversations have happened.
Yes, so in our proposal, we highlighted a couple of use cases. So for example, if we had a business conference or seminar where the seating would be an auditorium type of seating, we did an analysis of that as a study. We also looked at as a formal event with circular tables that would have anywhere from 8 to 10 chairs. We also looked into that as well and provided those numbers and plans by the architect.
And are we taking both cases together now?
Yes.
So she asked about the parking. So you and the village then discussed what the maximum capacity might be, 150 to 200. auditorium style, what did you then determine with the village to be your parking need and what exception would you like us to give tonight?
Absolutely. So I'm going to just read some numbers off to answer that question. So in our business proposal, we are saying that the business hours or use of our space will be after the bank is closed. So our events will not coincide with the bank. So with that being said, our parking numbers are specific just to the event space. And they meaning the fire department has required us to have a minimum of 48 spaces. Currently, we are providing 51 spaces. So we have a positive of 3 additional parking spaces.
So then, to be clear, the special use permit relating to parking is limited or constrained by the fire department to hours outside of the bank's traditional operation.
That is correct, and we have told them that we will comply and we approve and accept that condition.
Any other questions?
There's no alcohol served in the venue, I understand.
That is correct. No alcohol and no food will be cooked on site. The kitchen is just a warm-up kitchen.
How about waste disposal? How are you gonna handle that?
So we do currently have a contract with waste removal with the Fifth Third Bank. With the addition of this event space, we are working with the local waste management company to address the excess. Our architect also has identified a dumpster enclosure to accommodate for the extra dumpster that's needed.
I'm just concerned about if you have a large gathering of food. That's when make sure the waste is properly disposed of, but those from getting in.
Yeah, that's correct. And one of the great things about our architect and our design team is they are not just designing the space, but they are also taking sustainability and design resiliency into consideration. So we do have an entire compost, recycle and trash removal solutions in our waste management plan.
And contained inside.
That is correct.
Thank you. Any other questions?
This is my last question is the relationship to the bank and the hours. This is you cannot operate outside of these hours, so there'll be no special events where you have something during the day and try to use the parking lot. We're clear. Your hours will be 7 p.m. to midnight, Monday through Saturday. And then Sunday from noon to 11 p.m.
Yes, sir. That is absolutely true.
Thank you. That's it.
We're gonna add that to recommend. List of conditions. As far as the time.
It's in the staff report.
Yeah, we've-
What we can put it is in the form.
Yes.
Condition number 2, the meeting hall shall be permitted to operate during the non-business hours of the bank located on the first floor. It does not include, as far as I can tell, 11 to midnight.
The hours on the analysis for the worksheet at the bottom of the comment.
It's not in the list. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna have a staff, is reported to the record. Thank you. Staff. Oh, Mike, okay. Welcome back to the podium.
Yes, it's been a long time. Gotta figure out, let's see, where's the mouse? The report here. Just gonna scroll down to the graphics so that we can all see this together. I would like to have to request that both staff reports for 2023 10P parking determination and 2023 11P be accepted into the record as written.
Two questions, Matt.
Parking determination was based off of engineering's analysis of this as a banquet hall. That's the closest in our zoning ordinance that would apply to a meeting hall type of use. And as mentioned, they came up with a requirement of 48 parking spaces. Again, if both were operating at the same time, yes, we would have a definite deficiency, but as stated, they will not be operating at the same time as the bank will be. And again, that's also condition number 2 in the comments or the conditions for case 2023 11P. Staff is supportive of this request in that it's taking a underutilized space and repurposing it into a need in the community. We feel that it will give, additional commercial activity to this property. Other than just, the bank operating during its hours, we'll be able to utilize it more than what it's currently utilized as. I do want to go into some comments about some modifications that will need to be made to the site plan before this goes to the village board. On the site plan, there's an elevator that they are proposing to construct. So this will bring I don't know if you can even see that. There's an elevator addition that's going to be constructed just to the north of a 1-story glass atrium that's on the west side of the building. This elevator will be accessed through the atrium via a separate entrance from the bank. But on the site plan, the size of the elevator addition is much smaller than it actually should be. So the site plan will need to be modified to show the correct size of that. I think it's depicted correctly on the elevations, but on the site plan itself, it's very small. It looks like it's like 5 by 5. Much too small for an actual elevator. So it will have to be redrawn correctly.
Does that change the parking configuration at all?
No, the parking is all, the parking is across the driveway here and to the south. Up here, we've got a sidewalk. We've got a UPS drop box. But it will not impact any parking.
Mike, can I ask a question? The shaft is typically at what's it called? 7'7", something like that, 7 feet 7.
I don't know the standards. I mean, they vary.
Different sizes.
They vary,
right?
yeah.
It'll all be on an exterior of the building.
Yes, here's, so on your enlarged floor plan, there are dimensions with the specifications of the addition. And I can't even read it on mine.
But the addition just accommodates only the building of the ability to have.
Yes, the goal is to make that second floor ADA accessible, and this accomplishes that goal.
So that elevator will not go to the basement.
Correct. And then B, I'm under recommended special use conditions. We're requesting to revise the site plan to add a 3rd handicap parking space and loading area to the south of the 2 handicap spaces on the west side of the building. So with this number of parking spaces provided on site state code, we're at 51. Anything over 50 to 100 requires 3 handicap parking spaces on site. They've got 2 proposed. We noted that the 3rd one does have to be included. And so that 3rd one would be down here. And they would utilize that space for that 3rd handicap. We've got 2 handicap there already. And there'll be a 3rd one that will need to be striped in this area. We need to revise the total count of parking spaces indicated for the southern east-west row parking from 8 to 10. It's just a text label that's incorrect. This area down between this parking space where the handicap is going to go and then this property line here. So we've got a sidewalk, a public sidewalk running along Oakton Street. We just want to make sure that no cars park in here because inevitably, if they do, they would be hanging out over and blocking the public sidewalk, and we're trying to prevent that. So we want that to just be cross-striped as a non permissible for parking area. We would like to revise the site plan to indicate that signs will be posted saying that parking is prohibited within the loading area on the north side of the building. This will just be for a truck to drop off catering or party rental supplies or whatever, but it's not intended to be long-term parking for people, staying at the facility. We'd like the bicycle parking area to be moved from there's an area on the side here. We would like it to be relocated up into this curbed area. As I mentioned, there's a UPS drop box there, and there's just no space to fit both bicycle parking and UPS drop box in the same location. This will also move the bike parking up on a curbed area and reduce the amount of conflict with like a snowplow or a vehicle from potentially striking it. So it'll be in a safer spot. We're requesting that the landscape plan be revised to show planting of additional landscaping with the existing areas that are covered with sod, both along Oakton Street and along Kenneth Avenue. There's currently some plantings, but we'd like to maximize that and create an additional landscaping buffer along both of those streets and kind of take the sod out and put in some bushes or flowers, something to enhance the appearance. We'd also like to have additional landscaping planted up here in this island to the east of this row of parking that's on the north side of the alley. This is part of the subject site. It just happens to be divided by this east-west alley that runs through it. And then we've got dedication that needs to be made along Oakton Street. So right now the property occupies the public sidewalk here in this area. And so the petitioners will be required to dedicate this length of their property to become a part of the public sidewalk. The petitioners mentioned that the ATM on the site is not functional. Is that correct? Or the one that is drive up? Are they planning to keep that or remove that? No.
Do I need to?
You can come up now, please.
Per the Fifth Third representative, we were told that they will be removing it and not using it.
I was just asking because I wasn't aware of that at the time, and I believe that they do have an active special use permit for that. So we'll just keep an eye on it and monitor it, and if once it gets removed, we'll note it as an inactive special use permit and eventually
Will that,
repeal.
parking there, like,
No,
get up 2 spaces out of it, or?
no, I mean, if anything, it would be removed and we would just like to have some landscaping in place. We don't want to just have a pad sitting there, we'd like to have it replaced with some landscaping. But that was just news to me that it's not functional, so. Beyond that, engineering, fully reviewed it. Fire was fine with it once we got information on how wide the door widths were. That's how they determine occupancy for a gathering space, because you want to determine how many people can get out of the building in a certain amount of time. And we needed dimensions from the petitioner for those doorways and stairway widths. We received all those, and then the fire department was okay with their comments.
Is there any water, storm water retention on the property?
I think there is. I mean, I don't know if it's fully on the parking lot, but there are definitely inlets that, take the water down into the system and eventually get it out. I don't know. I mean, this is a very old property that
It's an old piece of property.
the bank's been there since probably the 60s at least. So if you'd like to come up.
Mr. Commissioner, I can add a little bit to that. So south of this property across Oakton is 4401. And in that space, there is 2 drive-up ATMs. And right next to it is a retention pond, but it's not filled with water. It's there for exactly for stormwater management. That's connected to 4400.
I believe that concludes my reports.
Any questions of the staff?
I have one for staff, so related to the parking. 48 spaces, correct, parking spaces, with a potential maximum occupancy of 200.
Yes,
So that calculation is satisfactory? In terms
Yes.
of your evaluation?
engineering reviewed it and worked off of, they've got a calculation with the banquet hall. Parking ratio of 1 to 100. Net floor area. And under that banquet hall classification, they were satisfied with the parking that we available. If it turns out that they get events where they have a large amount of people there, we certainly don't want them going into the neighborhood, and we're certainly going to hear about it. And we just ask that the petitioner work with finding an alternative location where overflow parking can be provided without impacting the public streets.
I do have two questions about that overflow parking.
Mhm.
One had to do with the streets. Oakton has public parking on it.
It does.
So, and at night presumably it does not have much. I drove past there to make sure it doesn't have much use. So that's an easy overflow of 10 to 20 cars within a block.
Correct. Both the east sides and west sides of, even Costner, if you go east, there's parking on the north side and west, yes.
It seemed like a lot of overflow on the street. So we intentionally don't want the excess cars to flow into the residential neighborhood, on which there's also public parking and plenty of room.
Correct. It'd be a much more preferable situation if you had them along that area where those other businesses might be closed at that time. And there's no impact upon, the residential portion. So we would certainly encourage the petitioner, if there's overflow, to direct it onto Oakton Street.
So I'm not troubled by Oakton. Now across the street at the old original bank site, where there still is a drive-through. There is some parking on that site, isn't there, besides the drive-through?
Minimal. I think there's 3.
10 spaces perhaps.
No.
Petitioner could answer that.
Commissioner Berman, yes, you are correct that there is a drive-through at 4401 where the old site was. We can certainly utilize that. However, there is another thing I'd like to add. Just for us to kind of engage with the community, we reached out to the Salvation Army and we spoke with them. We've engaged a partnership with them. When I say partnership, I don't mean financial, I just mean as friends, introducing ourselves as neighbors. And we did let them know that if in the case we ever need to use their parking lot, we can come to some sort of payment plan or some type of an agreement. And they actually really, not only were they happy about it, but they expressed the need for that type of donation or for that type of additional income for them, since they are a Salvation Army. So we do have that. So we don't have to ever use the street or residential neighborhoods. We do have the Salvation Army, and it's a mutual benefit for not just us, but for them as well, financially speaking.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, it's not really very thorough review. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mike, within the building for ingress, egress. There's stairwells. On both sides of the building. That is
So,
in there,
yes.
Right,
Northwest corner, we've got a stairwell coming back through this hallway.
and it has an emergency fire door at the end of it.
Right, there's a door that's coming out over here. And then we have there's a double door on the southwest corner. And that comes down and exits out through here. There's a large plan. There we go. So this is north, this is south, and these stairs come out and exit out through here. Okay. So yes, 2 points of ingress into this,
And actually, the third will be the elevator.
the elevator, correct?
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Michael, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Don't see anybody in the audience who. I'm gonna assume that no one has a question. Any of follow-up statements? Before we,
Did you have a question on something?
yes, would you position, please come up.
Well, they're like first day after, that's okay. In this case, because it's a special use and a drastically different use than the current use. Did we have to require public notice to the neighbors?
We did,
Okay, so all the neighbors have been notified.
yeah. that was
Thank
part
you.
of the-
So
part of the
then,
regular plan. The 250, I'm sorry, 100. I've already forgotten, 250 feet of the property.
yeah, mostly the houses to the north.
So any further comments or questions? Yeah,
Well, I think in closing to all of my team members here, on behalf of my team members, we'd like to thank you guys again. This is not just a financial or a business opportunity for us. This is a way for us to give back to our community. We understand with the pandemic and the work from home that we are trying to serve a need for those that are around us. It is the summertime. We have a bunch of new buildings and the park district coming up, so we'd like to, have an opportunity for kids to have their birthday parties again, for families to reconnect socially and have this space for the community. So we're really hoping to not only help with the economic development of Oakton Street, but also to work with our community neighbors as well.
thank you. Good luck with your project. Okay. On the first case, 2023. Section 10P, the parking determination. Or motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion.
Second.
Okay. Second. Michelle Osley, thank you. Call for the vote, Commissioner Osley.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
Commissioner Gupta.
Aye.
Commissioner McKay.
Aye.
No vote. The subject of case 2023-1P. Special use permit at 4400 Ocean Avenue. And this would include all the recommended changes and additions that staff has mentioned in the report.
Motion to approve 2023-11P special use permit. 4400 Oakland Street with the corresponding modifications as noted by the chair.
Well, I'm second. Second. Nice. Yeah, that's all. Changes, addition to corrections. On for the vote, Commissioner Osley.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
Commissioner Gupta. Aye. Commissioner McKay.
Aye.
No vote. Motion passes. Again, this case, this one case has to go for the Board of Trustees. For final approval, gentlemen, good luck to you, and have a good summer. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Our next case. Zoning chapter amendment for electric vehicle charging. Paul, or Evan? Present the recommendations.
Yes, Paul Reese, planning manager, 2023-12P zoning chapter amendment for electric vehicle charging stations. So as you all are well aware, the Village of Skokie passed an environmental and sustainability plan. And this is one of several text amendments that are coming down the pike regarding those recommendations out of that plan. So this is regarding EV charging. And a dual kind of purpose of this is to gain certification through the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, a bronze level for certification for electric vehicle certification. So there are 5 things that we'll kind of go over today in the changes. The first is permitting EV charging stations in all zoning districts. The second is classifying EV charging stations as an accessory use. The third is clarifying accessibility and site design requirements. The fourth is clarifying authorized use of the EV spaces. And fifth, allowing EV charging spaces to count as required off-street parking spaces. So the first is that EV charging stations are permitted in all districts where vehicles may be parked. Currently, it's limited to residential, so we'd like to update that to non-residential EV spaces as an added benefit to the village. The second is relating to EV stations as an accessory use. The change will show how EV charging stations are permitted as an accessory use within any parking lot or structure in all different zoning districts. Our third kind of topic is focusing on the accessibility of EV parking spaces following ADA, American Disability Act, and Architectural Barriers Act accessibility standards. This update will ensure that the village clearly follows all federal standards for accessible EV spaces. The fourth item clarifies who is authorized to use an EV charging station, that we follow the Illinois Vehicle Code regulations. And then finally, the fifth and probably most beneficial or most the thing that we'll probably see the most of is that the EV charging spaces will count as required off-street parking in any of our analysis and reviews. So currently the EV charging spaces don't count towards the off-street parking, and it makes it difficult to add EV parking spaces if a property is meeting the minimum requirement. So if they've got 50 spaces that they're required minimally, that's what the requirement is, and that's what they're providing, they don't have enough space to add any additional EV spaces. And so we've kind of run into that in different projects. And given the fact that EV vehicles are becoming more and more prevalent, we thought it would be a good idea to add those as the required spaces. So if you have 50 spaces required, you can provide 45 regular spaces, as it were, and 5 EV spaces, and still count towards that 50 minimum. So in conclusion, the staff recommends that the following sections of Chapter 118 zoning of the Skokie Village Code be amended with text to be added as highlighted and text to be removed, stricken through in the attached draft ordinance. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I have one.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious about and I understand the intent of not only allowing but requiring vehicle charging stations to be included in the count.
Mhm.
Should there not be a requirement or language that would indicate then that prevents a property owner from restricting the amount of time that a vehicle could be parked? Meaning many property owners that have charging stations will indicate that vehicle can only be there for a couple hours at a time,
Mhm.
which negates its use as a parking space
Mhm.
if no one can leave a vehicle there overnight.
Mhm. Yeah, we haven't seen that as being an issue. I think that most of these properties are, going to be larger parking lots, larger developments, larger apartment buildings that are going to have, a pretty substantial amount of parking, and so it hasn't. I don't believe it would be a problem to state it this way. I guess I hear what you're saying. That
That would be in direct contradiction, right? If on the one hand, you're saying that it's counting toward the total number of parking spaces, but if it is in effect not a parking space, because you can only be there for a short period of time, even if that period of time is a few hours,
Mhm.
then you don't have 50 parking spaces. If 5 of them are EV charging stations, you have 45, then you have 5 short-term parking spaces. Then I understand.
Yeah, I get what
may
you're
not
saying.
be
I mean, I think
concerned.
that the short term is still serving a function, right? I mean, it's still
Yeah, it's
allowing,
residential.
right?
It's not, it will be another 5 to 10 years. Another 10 years, every space will become.
I don't know about that.
Hey, Paul, so
They're gonna make it
let's,
run out of summers.
I know of 2 charging stations. One at Old Orchard
Yeah.
and the northeast corner. I think they're like 6 spaces. And then, not sure, and then the charging stations over by Village Crossing. Now, the charging stations there, at Village Crossing is Tesla, which is proprietary.
Mhm.
It can only be used by Tesla owners. And it's not generic.
Sure.
Okay, so how do those 2 charging stations fit into this amendment?
I think we're just trying to be as flexible as possible. Regarding parking, I mean, we've run into the case where, we've asked for EV charging and the applicant hasn't been able to do that because they're bumping up against the required minimum. And so we were just adding this text as a way to be as flexible as possible. Places like Village Crossing and Old Orchard are, over parked, so it's not really kind of apples to apples in that regard. They already have plenty of parking, and there's, proprietary Tesla spaces or timed spaces aren't putting up against that.
Let's say you have a situation where you have 4 charging stations,
Mhm.
okay? And you have 4 cars there. Usually you can get a decent charge in 15 or 20 minutes to get you home.
Mhm.
There are any provisions for stacking, people were waiting for these spaces to open up. I've seen some horror pictures of California where all the charging stations were all filled and the line of cars waiting to get into a station like blocks long.
So as staff, we've had some pretty extensive conversations and discussions about different scenarios that can arise as this happens. And I think where we always sort of end that conversation is there's a lot of technology that's going to change in the next couple of years. These vehicles aren't very prevalent on the secondary market, so you don't have right now, the majority of these cars are second or third vehicles for a household, and they are generally able to get charged at home. You're not seeing them as much in neighborhoods. Or when we talk to residential developers, they're preparing their properties for every space to be to charge at some point. But what we're probably seeing this more in is these tight commercial spaces like the one we just saw,
Yeah.
where if they wanted to add a charging station, it would take away from their available parking count. So I think that's where we're trying to do. We're definitely very sensitive to what you're talking about in terms of taking away spaces or specific proprietary chargers that would discourage, but also how do you move people from those spaces and not, and there's also, we're seeing charging happen much more quickly, so people may not use some of these commercial spaces as a place to charge their vehicles. We're already seeing some of that change. So it's really hard to take something that we know the science will change in 24 months and make zoning code to it.
Which is precisely my concern. I'm not concerned at all about the commercial spaces, short-term parking. I'm concerned about people who live in a place and need to park there overnight. So I'm asking specifically for an addition of language that would create a prohibition against restrictive policy.
Okay.
Prohibiting someone from parking overnight in a residential application.
My follow-up to that,
Otherwise, it's not a park.
my question,
You-
what Peter said, your point number 4, where you said that we're gonna follow the Illinois vehicle that regarding the authorized use of those parking spaces. I think that's what you said, Paul.
Yes.
So what is that underlies that Illinois vehicle code use and authorization that maybe answers some of Peter's questions and mine also as to how restrictive will those rules be on the use of those spaces? Do you know that?
I do not know the Illinois Vehicle Code well enough to answer that now.
Then I'm not sure that we can vote either dispositively or to give to the board our recommendation without that, because that really is the basic question. If we take their residential use, a small residential use, a building that's gonna have 20 units and have perhaps 20 spaces, and we section them off for 5 electric vehicle charging stations, but their use is restricted by something that we don't know the details of, the Illinois Vehicle Code. I'm afraid we're taking away 5 spaces then possibly from the 20, which is Peter's point at the beginning. We don't really have 20 spaces, nothing would work right, neither the banquet hall would work right, nor would the residential building.
Nobody's gonna police it anyways.
I think we could.
No, internally, no, in the building.
Private property.
Well, that's right, but that's what will be the.
So To clarify, the concern is with electric vehicles being treated as short-term vehicles versus I don't have an electric vehicle, I park in a space that is designed. It's the nuance of restrictions for the electric vehicles, if we've already restricted those spaces as electric vehicles, that your
That's my concern. That has to do with the language of whatever the point number 4 was about the Illinois Vehicle Code. I don't want a landlord to be able to restrict spaces. Not just for short-term use, as Peter suggested, that, but also for 24-hour use, and thereby remove those spaces from the overall building. It's something that we all have to figure out the proper.
But in those cases, are we just concerned about spaces, they have limited spaces, I'm case in point, like Grand Park South Underground.
Hmm.
They have probably a dozen chargers now, I see cars there all the time.
Charging.
Now, charging, now, they can probably use that space as a parking space. I also understand too that they have monthly overnight parkers there. Who actually rent it.
Those are all my concerns about, can a non-electric vehicle park in an electric vehicle spot? Probably not, because then they're taking valuable electric vehicle charging spot away from the world. And yet, if it goes to the overall count, how do we calculate then the proper number of units in the building, the proper utilization of parking lot? It's not that I'm fully in favor of all this. It's not that I'm opposed at all. It's just that I don't like.
I just was, we're getting into water, we're not familiar with.
Right, but it was point number 4 that concerned, point number 5, I think concerned here, point number 4 concerned me about this authorized use. I think that was the word you used. Authorization of use will be determined by the Illinois Vehicle Code. That's problematic. Glenn, you don't have any further knowledge about what that means? Not about the Illinois Vehicle Code, but about who authorizes the use. Is it then restricted only to electric vehicles? Do we then say that these 5 will only be electric vehicles in the building? And if nobody has an electric vehicle, then we have now cut our parking by 20 space lot by 25%.
I mean, we could require in a parking determination or special use, the language on those EV charging spots to say, instead of, only parking by EV vehicles, it could say priority or some other kind of less, specific or less
The basis is
onerous.
Parking, we need to provide parking, and then
Right.
if a residential use or commercial use wants to add these things, they're not then restricted to effectively decide between doing something.
In the zoning chapter, I mean, are we actually addressing parking or is parking a sub-use?
Well, we're creating a use that within the. Because right now, if we say electric vehicle, well, charging spaces are available for electric vehicles. So if we. Right now, if they put them in and they say anybody can park there and it counts towards the parking, so then you have somebody who doesn't have an electric vehicle parking in that space. And then
I
if
see
they,
that all the time.
right, so this is then creating those spaces. To allow them to restrict them, but most of these things, many of these uses may have some parking determination before the plan commission. Or would be some kind of site plan approval, so there is some additional oversight that this body would have and the board would have in terms of how that parking would be handled. In terms of special conditions.
I witnessed a lady parking her car. At Norfolk Court in the charging station. And I confronted her, and I said, charging station, she said to me, oh, it's a hybrid, walked away. I said, you don't plug in a hybrid. So, I mean, people are gonna take advantage of the spot, because charging stations in Norfolk Court are closest to the entrance.
And that's why.
They try to get the back of the lot. I would like the staff, I would like to kick it down the road a little bit, have the staff go over some of the comments and questions we have that are raised tonight. Then we will feel-
And for an existing, how does it work if I'm an existing property and I'm either at Okay, so if I'm at capacity and I had 5, they're not deleted from the available sign at permit. If I'm an existing. And maybe I don't have the number of allotted spots. They wouldn't be able to delineate the additional spots for electric, is that correct? Because they're not in compliance to begin with.
Yes, that's how I would take it, yes.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a developer, putting in parking spaces in apartment buildings, so do you have any accommodations for people to cars? And he said that he was talking with a subcontractor that would put in a couple stations there. Just for their use, but they wouldn't be parking spaces. They would park there, get up charge and take it back to the field from whence they came. So that eliminates at least three spaces that they could be utilized in the parking determination.
Right.
So let me ask something, of these 5 points, is the one that's causing everybody to raise concerns number 4? But number 1, permitting EV charging stations in all zoning districts is okay. Okay, then classifying EV charging stations as an accessory use is okay?
Sure.
Okay. Clarifying accessibility and site design and requirements based on best practices. Okay, with that one too. Okay, I'm gonna pause on, I'm gonna skip 4, I'm gonna go to 5. So I'm sensing a theme here, allowing EV charging spaces to count as required off-street parking spaces. I get a pause.
Because it blends with 4.
4, right.
Right, if 5 would be okay, if 4 didn't exist in this authorization issue.
So let me ask
Get
Paul a
the
question,
user.
because he's been closer to the EV work with the Metropolitan Mayor's Office. Is 4 some big requirement that we have to have? Or can we live without 4?
I,
If you don't have it, we're gonna have to negotiate the issue every time somebody comes.
Absolutely. So
Which is why I'm asking for the language to modify that, to suggest that.
So if we don't have 4, it's counted. Anyway,
Not if it's not a parking space,
And that if it's got authorized use.
restricted use.
So.
I-
I think.
So it's, again, my concern is where it's a residential development at capacity, utilizing this provision, which we are granting them to create additional flexibility to allow them to count an EV charging station as a parking space. We cannot simultaneously allow them to restrict the use of that space to prevent persons from parking overnight, else it is no longer a parking space. So we either have to add language or we have to.
I'm not sure that if we were to enact local code, zoning code, it would trump the vehicle code for the state of Illinois too. Am I aware?
Maybe we need to find
But
out.
that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how many parking spaces are determined and required at an individual site.
Mhm.
So if you determine that the minimum is 45 at a location, that's the minimum. And they're coming in and saying, we've got 45 parking spaces, but oh, by the way, 5 of them are charging stations. And they also are restricting their use so that you can only charge your vehicle for 2 hours at a time. Then you only have 40 parking spaces.
Right,
So you're 5 spaces below the minimum. It has nothing to do with any of the other ancillary codes. That's completely within our jurisdiction and our purpose.
right, it's not.
So if we're saying that their requirement was 50 and they have 45 spaces plus 5 charging stations, then there's no issue. But if they're already at the minimum and they're restricting the use of those spaces, then they are in fact not at the minimum, they are below.
But it's not whether we're asking to change the Illinois vehicle code, or how you
Yeah.
can or cannot authorize use. We're assuming that exists. We're then saying that they can't.
I mean, those 5 spaces in your example are still used by electric
I don't
cars.
care what kind of cars park there, absolutely electric cars, they can restrict it to electric cars, no problem.
You're just saying the
But again,
hours.
I'm suggesting that they cannot be allowed to restrict access to those spaces overnight.
Would language that says in cases where it is counted towards the minimum, they are not allowed
Sure.
to restrict the hours, whereas if they have that 5 extra, if
Yeah,
in your example, it was 50 and they were required 45, those 5 extras, they could regulate however they see fit.
Right, where the minimum number of parking spaces as required.
Minus the electric.
minus the electric, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I think I'm fine with
So
that.
then does 4 and 5 work in that language?
That's fine.
So then if there was a motion to amend the language, that would be helpful.
Okay. All right, so
We have to move to amend before we move for the passage of that particular amendment.
So whoever's gonna bring this up for a motion will amend.
This is for all zones, commercial and residential.
Mhm.
So you would be restricting the ability of a small business to prevent someone from parking overnight potentially.
I was adding the word residential.
You are, okay,
Yeah.
that's why I want to be clear about what.
In residential.
Numbers 1 and 2 were for the other, for all the zones, so we said that. We were taking very small zones, but on this particular issue, we were only.
Talking about residential. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so if we're gonna move on this tonight,
I'm sorry, I have one more thing though.
Yes.
So thinking of the banquet facility, let us say this banquet facility is really at the peak, where Peter and I aren't sure that 50 is the right number of cars anyway for 200 people in the banquet facility, but putting that aside. If we were to take 5 of those out of the mix every day, because there will not be electric vehicles parking there because of number 4 Illinois Vehicle Code authorized use. We are then saying in this banquet facility that forget about overnight uses we were discussing a second ago, we are saying that we really don't have effectively 50 spaces, we are 51, we only have 45. That also troubles me. It goes back to the issue. I'm not sure that we're clearing it all up with the simple residential amendment because we still have the issue of the Illinois Vehicle Code says you can pre-authorize use and restrict use to only electric vehicles. We're taking them out of the overall banquet hall mix. So are you asking correctly, or are we only talking residential or commercial? I'm not sure. It depends on the quantity of spaces, depends on if there's a surplus, depends on use. When we think of Village Crossing Old Orchard, those are obviously large lots that don't gather as much, but again, to this little banquet hall, cramming 50 cars into the 200 for 200 people, but that lot,
Right.
took some of those out. Now, why the developer would do that, we're encouraging them to do that, but there's no mandate.
No mandate, no, we're just allowing it. So you're suggesting to prohibit restricting the hours of use if they're at their parking, if they're capped at the minimum.
I'm saying, I think I'm taking away that there will be a restricted use, which is terrible of me to say, I want electric vehicle charging
Right.
stations. But I'll let anybody park there and thereby clog up the
I
electric.
mean,
Okay, all right, I've been right. Let me read this and tell me if this would be appropriate language that we could potentially add. Where the determination for parking does not exceed the minimum parking determination. And the application is residential. The electric vehicle charging station / parking spaces may not be restricted by time between the hours of 7 PM and 7 AM.
okay,
sounds good.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah, I
I'm
like
happy with
that
that.
too, but the one thing I think of in commercial is a lot of our buildings on big streets have retail on the first floor and people would like to have access. So to that point, hours of operation would indicate overnight, as you illustrated. That 7 PM to 7 AM takes care of the residents in the building. I point out in the banquet hall, they actually could have 3 and still be in
Right.
compliance.
Yeah,
Okay, motion to approve case
I have
20.
a question. Okay, so we're talking about. Let's say an instance where, let's say, I mean. The companies that are starting up, they're gonna be like. Vendors, of the EV station. In other words, they'll lease space someplace and put their machines in there and charge people running. Yeah,
Yes, that's allowed as an accessory use in this,
Yeah,
what we're talking about now. That is not really what, if I'm
that would-
stating correctly, it's not really what we've been kind of discussing in the examples given so far. Those are pretty few and far between. We haven't really had too many examples come our way as a standalone pay for your EV charging. I would expect to hear about that soon
And the
enough,
truck
but
would be treated like a parking lot, and in the future, they would be treated either like a gas station. or a drive-thru.
yeah, our code talks about them as a gas station.
Fueling
Just wanna
station.
make sure we have.
Thank you.
I'm hopeful that we end up with solar powered and not electric.
No, the future is hydrogen powered cars. Come on.
The biggest cost, gas costs around.
So it seems to me perhaps we have to move,
Cylinder.
that we have to move this in its entirety. And then as it gets moved and seconded, before we vote, then the amendment gets made. That would be the appropriate way to do this.
That's right.
So I am about to move the adoption of this, even though I know that there's an amendment coming. So I move the adoption as presented of 2023-12.
So moved,
And somebody should second that.
so second.
But now,
Second. Okay, then now comes the,
I would like to move to amend the language specifically in point number 4 to include the provision that shall state. Where the determination for parking does not exceed the minimum parking determination and the application is residential, the electric vehicle charging stations / parking spaces may not be restricted by time between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7.
okay, Scott, you agree with this since you?
and I'm second the amendment.
Okay,
I think technically you need 2 votes.
Yeah, we do, first we have to vote on the amendment before we vote on the motion, that's right. So I second the amendment, now we're voting on the amendment first.
Okay, I agree.
okay, call for vote. On that note, Commissioner Oosley.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
Commissioner Gupta. Aye. Commissioner McKay.
Aye.
No vote aye. Okay, is everybody happy?
You see the vote.
Second vote on the action.
The amendment.
Okay, so we're doing the vote on the action, correct?
The action now as amended. The one. We already moved and seconded. and that was the amendment.
Move on
It was already moved.
Already moved. All right, call for the vote. Commissioner Oosley. Aye. Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
Commissioner Gupta. Aye. Commissioner McKay.
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. Hey, gentlemen, I think we made history tonight.
Are you supposed to word this agreement?
Anything else before the board? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.
With writing.
Right.